Hello and welcome to the Dark Side of Stardew Valley Part 2. In this video, I'll be going over all the dark and mysterious topics surrounding Pelican Town and Stardew Valley that I didn't go into in my last video. If you haven't watched Part 1 yet, then I highly suggest you watch that first, as I give a more in-depth description on what that video is about in the intro, and I go over and discuss some of the more known dark and semi-hidden topics of Stardew Valley. Also, this video took me over a month to make, which is why I haven't uploaded anything in a while, so I would greatly appreciate it if you could smash that like button and subscribe. So without further ado, let's get into the Dark Side of Stardew Valley Part 2. In Pelican Town, there are two little kids. One of them is called Vincent and the other is called Jazz. Now, I mentioned Vincent very briefly when I was talking about Kent's PTSD in the first Dark Side of Stardew Valley video, but I'm not going to be talking about Vincent any longer because he isn't very interesting. However, Jazz is pretty interesting because not much is known about her, but what we do know is that she lives with her Aunt Money because both of her parents died of unknown causes, and that Shane is her godfather. Now, Shane is Jazz's godfather because he was good friends with Jazz's parents, but surprisingly, his aunt is also Marnie. Now, because of the age gap and the fact that Shane was good friends with Jazz's parents, they can't be siblings, but they are both related to Marnie, so they must be cousins. But the thing is, if Marnie is the aunt of both Shane and Jazz, then that means that Jazz's parents were also Shane's auntie and uncle, and Shane is Jazz's godfather because he was friends with Jazz's parents, but this doesn't really make much sense to me, because for example, I don't introduce my uncle as my friend, I introduce him as my uncle because, well, he is my uncle and not my friend. So I thought that the game would introduce Shane as her cousin, not godfather. Shane is probably just labelled as Jazz's godfather because he has legal custody over Jazz, but something still doesn't seem quite right here, like I'm missing a part of the puzzle. But then again, nothing is ever quite right in Pelican Town. Also, something funny I just want to point out about the whole Jazz situation is that in Jazz's bedroom there is a dollhouse, and in this dollhouse, her whole family is sitting around the dinner table except her grandfather, who is wedged under the table. Now, you can make your own mind up about this, but I think that this probably alludes to Lewis's secret relationship with Marnie that I went in depth into in the Dark Side of Stardew Valley Part 1, and how Jazz is at least somewhat aware of it, which means that Lewis and Marnie can't even hide their relationship from a somewhat innocent child. That's just sad. Shane is the character that acts very rudely towards you when you first move into Pelican Town. Some of his regular Zero Heart dialogue includes, "I don't know you. Why are you talking to me? What? What do you want from me? Go away. No, I don't have time to chat with you. What do you want from me? Money? I'd give you a pot of gold to leave me alone." And the list goes on and on. However, if you speak to him enough, then he does eventually go on to say, "Hey, sorry if I came off as rude when we first met. It takes me a while to warm up to strangers," which is the first sign of him not being a horrible person, but just being a horribly depressed one. The next sign of him being a horribly depressed person is his second heart cutscene. The cutscene starts off with Shane standing at the edge of a dock, drinking and looking into the darkness of the night. You then realize Shane is there and approach him. After a couple of words, Shane starts to go into detail about his depression and how it feels to him. You ever feel like, no matter what you do, you're gonna fail? Like you're stuck in some miserable abyss and you're so deep you can't even see the light of day. I just feel like no matter how hard I try, I'm not strong enough to climb out of the hole. Honestly, ConcernedApe, you're a great writer. If that just rhymed, then it would have sounded like an unreleased Juice WRLD song and a half. Anyway, you down some beer, Shane tells you not to make a habit of it, like he did, and then the cutscene ends after Shane jokingly says his liver is begging him to stop drinking for the night. Pleasant stuff. Shane's 4-heart cutscene, however, is the first time we really get to see the consequences of his depression and alcohol abuse. The scene starts off with you walking into Shane's room and seeing him passed out on the floor surrounded by beer cans. So it's obvious that he drank heaps of beer until he eventually passed out. Marnie is a bit worried by this, so you use your watering can to wake him up. Once awake, Marnie remarks that all Shane does is mope around and drink beer. She then starts questioning Shane about his purpose in life and his plans for the future. And Shane responds to that with, "I won't be around long enough to need a plan." Jazz overhears this and runs off crying. Marnie goes out of the room to comfort Jazz and Shane breaks down into tears. Overall, this cutscene is a pretty sad reality of what some people's lives are truly like. However, Shane's 6-heart cutscene is definitely the worst in a sense of his struggles with depression and alcohol abuse. The cutscene starts off with you entering Cindersap Forest and seeing Shane laying face down at the edge of a cliff, visibly drunk. Shane then starts to talk about how his life is a pathetic joke, and how no matter what he does, he seems unable to grasp a hold of it. He then suggests that he should just roll off these cliffs and, ultimately, end his life. However, just like usual, he's too scared and anxious to do so. Shane then asks you why he shouldn't just roll off this cliff right now, and the game gives you 4 options. No matter what option you pick, you save Shane from potentially ending his life, and he asks you to help him over to Harvey's clinic. Once in the clinic, Harvey assures you he's stabilized Shane's physical condition and that he'll be fine. However, Harvey is concerned about Shane's mental health, and he recommends that Shane should see a counselor in Zuzu City once he's better. So yeah, as I said, this is definitely the most impactful cutscene Shane has in the game, and for some people it may even be the most impactful cutscene in the entirety of Stardew Valley, as his next 6 heart cutscenes are all positive ones and are mostly about him healing from his anxiety, depression, and alcohol abuse. In Stardew Valley, there is Shane, the depressed alcoholic, and then there is the typical town drunk, Pam. Pam lives in a literal trailer with her daughter Penny, and her daily schedule goes a little something like this. 8 AM, lounges on a couch in the trailer. 12 PM, leaves the trailer and heads to Joja Mart. 4 PM, leaves Joja Mart and heads to the saloon. 12 AM, leaves the saloon and heads home. And this schedule does not change depending on what day of the week it is, what the weather is like, or what the season is like. This is the same depressing schedule she follows every single day. Well, except for the 25th of spring, because that is her annual checkup day at the doctor's, and it seems physically impossible for the characters in Stardew Valley to miss their annual checkup day. But Pam's schedule didn't used to be that bad, because before you arrived in Pelican Town, the bus used to be up and running. But then one day, the bus broke down and Pam had to return to her habitual job of being a full-time alcoholic, as Mayor Lewis claimed that there's not enough money in the town's coffers or else you'd have it fixed. Yep, that's right, Mayor Lewis, the man that builds secret solid gold statues of himself, probably out of taxpayer money, says that there isn't enough money in the town's coffers to fix up a bus. A broken down bus. The depths of corruption that this man finds himself into seems to never end. But luckily for the town, you can put all the hard work in and restore the bus for a small price of 42,500 gold by completing the Vault bundle in the community center. Or you can restore the town bus for only 40,000 gold. And a large piece of your soul by signing away your life to Joja Corp and buying the bus repair option in the community developments projects at Joja Mart. Either way, it's your choice. But the most alarming thing about this whole Pam situation is the fact that the town drunk, that is notorious for being the town drunk, who seems to never be 100% sober, asked Mayor Lewis to put her life on the line and others by becoming the town bus driver. Lewis agreed to this, and when the bus inevitably crashed, no investigations or anything that we know of happened, and then when Mayor Lewis was asked if he would fix up the bus so Pam could drive it again, he said he would if the town had enough money to do so. And once you fix up the bus by yourself, Pam is back driving it again. Like, what? No wonder the bus was originally broken down. She probably crashed it into something while she was drunk driving it. It is also important to note that Pam raised Penny as a single mother, as Penny's dad abandoned them both while Penny was still at a very young age. This was because he felt trapped. Probably because he had a child with an alcoholic mother who lived in a very poor socioeconomic standard. However, this might not have been the case. For all we know, Pam could have picked up alcoholism as a coping mechanism after Penny's father left. And the low socioeconomic conditions that they live in may be a consequence of this coping mechanism and the fact that Penny's father, who might have been the only one that had a job, left. Either way, this is no excuse for the fact that Penny's father left his family and left them in ruin. Also, something I want to say just before we get into the next segment is that although Pam is an alcoholic and she leaves Penny to do all the menial labor tasks around the house, the game seems to hint that Pam never lays a finger on Penny, so she never physically abuses her. In fact, to me, Pam is the type of person where if you mistreated or harmed Penny in any way, no matter your size or how dangerous you were, she would find you and beat the crap out of you, as she just loves her daughter that much. Now, as we just discussed 2 segments ago, Pam drives the bus to the desert once it has been repaired, and in the desert there are a couple of things, but the thing that we're going to be focusing on right now is the Oasis shop run by Sandy. The Oasis shop is a very small shop that sells basic things like mid/endgame seeds that you can't buy at Pierre's, some house vanity, and random stock items. But what makes this interesting isn't Sandy or her small shop, but it's actually what is in the back of a small shop. Because you see, when you enter the Oasis, there is Sandy at her counter, some non-interactable shelves, and a suspicious looking man dressed in all black. Now, if you go up to this particular suspicious looking man that's dressed in all black, then you'll see that he's actually called the Bouncer. But the Bouncer to what? Surely Sandy isn't voluntarily letting a mysterious person run a probably not legal casino at the back of a shop. Right, guys? Well, yeah, Sandy is actually doing exactly that. Like, just look at this piece of 4-heart dialogue. Hey, I can trust you. You can keep a secret, right? That guy in the back. It's some kind of exclusive club. I've never been inside myself, but they pay me a generous monthly rent, so I don't ask any questions. But if Sandy isn't running this exclusive club, then who is? Well, that person is Mr. Chi. You first come into contact with Mr. Chi by putting a battery pack in this box in the tunnel left of the bus stop. Mr. Chi then gives you 4 more quests in successive order before you finally acquire the club card. This club card gives you access to the probably not legal casino, where you finally meet Mr. Chi for the first time. And the casino is a pretty cool place, you know. You got the stat tracker, you got this guy who gives you these statues which aren't actually very good for 1,000,000 gold each, you got the token shop, you got the slot machines, you got the small blackjack table where you can only bet 100 tokens at. This is the table you go to if you're a little bitch. And then there's this blackjack table, where you go if you're a real man. Mr. Chi also appears in Skull Cavern, and he also appears on Ginger Island where you learn a little bit more about him. He also appears in the 1.5 added Summit completion cutscene, where you learn that he was actually a friend of your grandpa. Now, I haven't actually watched the Summit cutscene before, because I got to like 94% completion, and then I stopped playing Stardew and instead started grinding out Stardew Valley videos. So I only know of Grandpa and Mr. Chi's relationship because of the wiki, so I can't add any more information to the topic of Mr. Chi and Grandpa's relationship because I simply do not have the knowledge to do so. So if anyone in the comments has watched the cutscene before and knows what happens in it, then you're welcome to tell me down below. So, in short, Sandy is this very lonely woman that runs a small shop called the Oasis in the desert, and at the back of her small shop there is a very shady and probably not legal casino being run by Mr. Chi that Sandy does know about but turns a blind eye to because they bribe her with what she considers a generous monthly rent. Yeah. Just when you thought this game couldn't get any more crazy, it does. Also, just before we move on to the next segment, I found something really funny about Sandy while searching through the game's code. According to Sandy herself, my name's not really Sandy, you know, it's just good for business. But everyone calls me Sandy anyway, so I've just gotten used to it. So yeah, you learn something new every day. In Stardew Valley, there are 9 different known races: humans, Junimos, goblins, shadow people, dwarves, fairies, elves, mer people, and tundra dwellers. But the 2 races that we're going to be focusing on in this segment are dwarves and the shadow people. According to the Stardew Valley wiki, shadow people are beings that cannot stand the light, which kinda makes sense considering that they are called shadow people, and that whenever you meet one in game, they are always underground. For example, shadow shamans and shadow brutes can be found in levels 81 to 119 of the mines, and once unlocked, Krobus can be found in the sewer. Now, according to the not so famous M. Jasper, the dwarves call themselves Smolowanu, which translates to sky people. But the thing is that dwarves do not live in the sky. In fact, the only dwarf that appears in Stardew Valley lives in a cave next to the mines, which definitely isn't the sky. But don't worry, M. Jasper got us covered again. They theorize that dwarves are the remnants of a once advanced civilization whose interplanetary vehicle crashed on this planet long ago. I propose that this dwarvish spaceship bore down, deep underground, and over time, the dwarves became adapted to their new underground environment. My colleagues ask, why didn't they come above ground and live on the surface? Perhaps their old planet had a thicker atmosphere that protected them from stellar radiation, and they simply could not survive in our sunlight. That would explain why they only surface at night to take what they need from our houses. Now, this whole theory does make a lot of sense, especially when you consider all the other alien races and references throughout the game. Also, I don't mean to spoil the fun and uncertainty of theories, but this theory comes from one of the lost books in the library, which means that ConcernedApe himself wrote this piece of literature. So if the developer of the game wrote this theory himself, then it's probably true. When the dwarfs crashed their spaceship deep underground, they encountered a problem, because you see, the Shadow People were already there. In fact, it was their ancestral land, and now these new mysterious dwarf peoples had crashed on their ancestral lands, stranded with nowhere else to go. This is how the Elemental Wars started. The Shadow People were not the violent type at first, but after being attacked by the dwarf people on their own lands, they were forced to resort to violence. It is unknown how long this war lasted and how many casualties there were, but the dwarf people and the Shadow People now live in peace for the sake of the humans surrounding them. However, the Shadow People and the dwarf people still do not like each other, as indicated by the dwarf's 50 friendship point cutscene with Krobus. The cutscene starts off with the dwarf and Krobus arguing in the sewers. Long story short, the dwarf isn't happy at Krobus being above the ground because the Shadow People killed his family. Krobus explains to him that these tragic events only happened because the dwarf people drove his people out of their ancestral lands by force. He also apologizes for the loss of the dwarf's family straight after. But the dwarf isn't having it and he starts running at Krobus. As you enter the sewer, you find the dwarf and Krobus fighting, so you run in between them to break up the fight. The dwarf still struggles to get at Krobus, but then from out of nowhere, the wizard enters and seals them both to the ground with a spell. He then lectures them about how they must live at peace for the sake of the humans that surround them. The dwarf and Krobus both agree to keep peace, and then the wizard casts a seal of agreement to finalize the agreement. In this quick little segment, I wanted to point out some things that are integral to the Stardew Valley lore, or are interesting in some kind of way, but they aren't quite considered dark as such, so they aren't long enough to have their own segment. For the first one, we have Yoba. Yoba is the deity or god of Stardew Valley. There's nothing inherently dark about Yoba, but it is referenced throughout Stardew Valley a lot. And it is a literal god, so I thought I would briefly mention it. The Genomos are the little green apples that you first find in the community center. You will later go on to find out that the Genomos also go by the name of the Elementals, and that they are nature beings that are integral to the Stardew Valley lore. Just like Yoba, there's nothing inherently dark about them. However, you can technically enslave their population with the help of the wizard, and you can systematically change the color of their skin depending on which item you put in their hut. But I think I'm just reading too far in between the lines here. There's nothing actually dark about the Genomos. Now, if you have ever played Stardew Valley before, then you will know Grandpa. Grandpa is literally the first NPC in the game that you were introduced to, and he is, now I know this may surprise you, your grandpa. Now, at the start of year 3, Grandpa comes back to haunt you, just like how you should haunt that subscribe button. I'm a disappointment to my family. Anyway, Grandpa doesn't actually haunt you. He comes back through your dreams to check up on how you're doing with the farm. And if you've done a good job, so you've ticked all of these boxes, he'll be happy and go away. But if you haven't ticked all of these boxes, then he'll be angry and be like, bro, why did you not fix up the farm? Like, no one likes you, you suck. Before eventually fading away. However, getting 4 candles on Grandpa's shrine does give you the Statue of Perfection, which gives you 2 to 8 iridium ore per day. So I would recommend you trying to get it. There are a lot of theories floating around the internet that are like, Grandpa's blue and he's a ghost, so that means Mr. G's a ghost because he's blue. Right, guys? And all that kind of stuff. And because none of these theories have any actual facts behind them, I just didn't include them in the video. But something that does have facts behind it is the fact that Grandpa and Mr. Chi were friends. However, just like I said before, I don't really know much about this, so if you could inform me on what's said in the summit cutscene between the two of them, then I would appreciate that. Clint represents that one guy we all know who has zero confidence and is really shy, and he probably thinks of himself as a bit of a nice guy, which is not good. Now, being a very shy and unconfident person, especially around women, isn't something that would really warrant him being in this video. However, I think we need to quickly go over his 6 heart cutscene, as it gets a little bit suspicious. The cutscene starts off with Clint hiding in a bush, watching Caroline and Emily talk. Now you see Clint watching them and you run up to him, and as you run up to him he admits that you caught him lacking and he explains that he was just at Emily's doorstep ready to ask her out on a date. But when he heard her coming to the door, he panicked and hid in a bush. So now he's waiting until Emily and Caroline stop talking because he's too scared to ask out Emily in front of Caroline. But knowing Clint, once Caroline walks away, he'll still probably be too scared to ask out Emily and he'll just stay in the bush that he's currently in. So what happens is that you tell Clint that if he does not get out of the bush and ask Emily out right now, then you will never upgrade your tools at Clint's again. And it works. Clint reluctantly goes up and asks out Emily, and she says yes, so everybody lives happily ever after the end. However, I've seen some people online call Clint a creep because he watched a woman from a bush. Now, I think that's a little bit out of context, as he was going to talk to Emily, got scared and hopped in the bush to wait. But like, even if he's just waiting for her, he's still watching a woman unknowingly from a bush. So yeah, it's still a little bit weird. He may be a little bit creepy, but that's for you to decide. In Pelican Town, there are two child inhabitants called Chaz and Vincent, and later in the game Leo joins the town. But like, nobody cares about Leo, so that's not really important. But what is important is that despite there being two children in the town, there is no form of school or place to receive some form of education. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if their parents just simply homeschooled them, but out of Kent, Jody, Marnie, and I guess Shane, none of them homeschool their children. So really, nobody actually cares about the well-being and future of their kids in this town. However, Penny, the nicest NPC in Pelican Town, does. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, she educates them in the library, and she even goes out of her way to set up mini excursions, as shown in her 8-heart cutscene where she's giving them a field trip. So yes, that's right, after dealing with all the menial labor tasks around her house, she has to deal with her alcoholic mother and the lack of a father. And then after all of this, she then goes out of her way to take care of other people's children for them with zero monetary incentive. Meaning she does all of this out of the kindness of her heart. I usually marry Abigail, so Penny's not the character I go for. However, any Penny slander in this comment section will not be tolerated, because she's like literally the nicest person ever. Alright, that's the end of the grey side of Stardew Valley. But remember, we still have our special guest coming up later in the video. So now, let's get on to the next segment. Sebastian lives at 24 Mountain Road, unsurprisingly in the mountains, with his mother Robin, his half-sister Maru, and his stepdad Demetrius. Now basically how this works is that Robin got married to a man that we don't have the identity of, and had a kid named Sebastian. Robin then broke up with this man for unknown reasons, and then later married Demetrius. Robin and Demetrius then had a kid named Maru. So now Sebastian is Robin's original son, Demetrius is his stepdad, and Maru is his half-sister because they both have the same mother. But if we don't know the identity of Sebastian's biological father, then how do we know that this is actually Robin's second marriage? For all we know, something much worse could have happened to her, right? Well, luckily for us, ConcernedApe put some sneaky little hints into the game that basically confirm this is Robin's second marriage. Because if you sneak into Robin's room and you take a quick peek at the bookcase, then you'll find a book called Maximizing Your Second Marriage and another book called Practical Tips for First-Time Stepdads. Now the Practical Tips for First-Time Stepdads book is obviously for Demetrius, which is why I think that the other book, Maximizing Your Second Marriage, is for Robin, especially when you factor in Sebastian. But like, who knows? Maybe Robin never got married in the first place and Maximizing Your Second Marriage book is actually for Demetrius. Also, something about this family I wanted to point out before I move on to the next segment is that Sebastian feels like his stepfather Demetrius treats him somewhat unfairly. This is indicated by his two winter dialogues here. I built a snow goon, but Demetrius made me get rid of it. What's his problem? And I built a snow goon, but Demetrius made me get rid of it. Yet Maru's cute little snowman goes unharmed. Ridiculous. Sebastian also has a piece of autumn dialogue about his distaste for his father. Who does Demetrius think he is? Telling me what to do. He's not even my real father. And that piece of dialogue makes me think that Sebastian's issue with his stepfather Demetrius goes a little deeper than just the removal of his snowman. Sebastian also has a strained relationship with his half-sister Maru, a relationship that Maru herself wishes was better.
Hey yo, it's Yama. I also make some cool started content if you want to check me out afterwards. Okay, let's talk about Alex and how he fits into the dark side of Stardew Valley. Alex is a young man with big dreams, one of which is becoming a sports superstar. He also happens to live with his grandparents, George and Evelyn. But why does this seemingly independent young man live with his grandparents? Well, it's because of debt. You see, Alex had a very rough start to life. Early on, he had to deal with an abusive father who drank all night, degraded him, and called him worthless. And when he wasn't emotionally damaging his child's mental state, Alex's father was gone, completely absent from his life. And one day, Alex's father did exactly that. He got up and downright left, for good. Soon after that, Alex's mother Clara got sick, and the rest of the story resides in the heartbreaking letter on Evelyn's nightstand. Mama. If you're reading this, it means I've passed on. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. Know that I love you both. Don't be too upset. I'm with Yoba now. My final request, take care of Alex. He needs a family, something stable. He's a good kid. Love, Clara. On another note, Dusty, the town dog, also appears in 2 of Alex's heart events. This is because he feels a deep connection with him and is the only other being left that has experienced Alex's traumatic past home life.
Thank you for watching this video. If you for some reason haven't watched part 1 already, then go do that. It's in the pinned comment in the description. And for those who have watched both parts, I'm guessing you're wondering what's next. Well, unless ConcernedApe adds a metric ton of new and dark themes to characters in Stardew Valley, which I not only don't expect them to do, but don't really want them to do, then this will be the last video in the Dark Side of Stardew Valley series. However, this isn't the complete end of the series because I plan to make another Dark Side video on the topic of Stardew Valley one day. So one day, if I have enough time, and I'm not working on another video, and I'm not being hammered by some random ass English homework, then yes, it will be released. But for now, this is the end. Also, please help me to fix up this not subscribed to subscriber ratio by subscribing, as it's very terrible. Okay, that's the end for all this time. Just watch one of these 2 videos. I promise you'll enjoy it. Alright, goodbye.